It's a warm summer night in Hollywood, and I make my way through the crowded, dodgy dive bar where the sounds of LCD sound system can be heard emanating from the pulsating DJ booth. The CobraSnake weaves his way through the crowd of 20-something-year-olds, most of which look like they could be characters in the 2007 drama Skins, with their ripped black tights and heavy black eyeliner. He snaps a photo of me leaning against the pillar of the bar. At the end of the night, everyone gathers around outside. Cigarette smoke and drunken conversations thick in the air. The DJ greets me with her blonde hair and lacy white clothing and girlish cadence. She immediately strikes me as Americanized Cassie Ainsworth. Behind me, the CobraSnake continues capturing the evening. People line up against a wall, recreating the cover of the 2008 self-titled Crystal Castles album. The girls in front of me capture their own photos with their handheld digital cameras. One could easily mistake this scene as taking place in the 2000s, but here we are in the year 2024. The scenery is almost entirely indistinguishable from the year 2008, from the clothing to the music to the tech being used. A crowd of young people cosplaying an era they only know the echo of, consumed with nostalgia for an era they never truly knew, but they would have liked to know. Nostalgia lines the streets of Hollywood in the string of billboards advertising prequels, sequels, biopics, and remakes. The target audience is often ambiguous and not clear. Are they pandering to us and our nostalgia, or catering to the younger generations? Children today watch replicas of the media we grew up watching, the hand-drawn animation swapped for cheap-looking CGI, or animation is scrapped altogether and a half-hearted live-action adaptation is made. A long-past celebrity is risen from the dead to perform amongst the influx of biopics in a necromancy-esque ritual. These celebrities and artists are risen from their graves, their corpses hoisted up on puppet strings in another display of performance. Though despite the spectacle, the marionettes still reek of rotting flesh. Everywhere I look, there seems to be a longing for the past, in the form of advertised and commodified nostalgia. But why? I have always been a girl plagued by nostalgia. I have often referred to myself as nostalgic to a fault, and when I was a teenager, I would often make myself ill from my tendencies to soak in my nostalgia-fueled melancholy as I reflected on the past, though it would seem I'm not the only one. Gen Z has been referred to as the most nostalgic generation amongst millennials. We are a generation consumed by nostalgic consumption. Nostalgia consumption is described as a social and cultural trend that could be described as the act of consuming goods that elicit memories from the past, being associated with the feeling of nostalgia. Is it us that cannot let go of the past, or are we merely being force-fed the past? Like a mother bird, capitalism regurgitates the digested media of the past into our mouths, and we eat it up every time. River Quintana writes in their essay, The Cult of Yesterday, capitalism, it seems, can't let go of the past. Like a necromancer, it reanimates the corpses of bygone eras, ideologies, and aesthetics, and then sells them back to us at a markup. This capitalist necromancy, as it were, thrives on a manufactured brand of nostalgia, manipulating our longing for a romanticized past in order to justify its own uninspiring, even grotesque existence. They continue, look no further than the endless parade of reboots, sequels, revivals dominating our screens. Studios exploit our affection for beloved franchises, resurrecting them as hollow shells devoid of their original spark. These cultural zombies, stripped of their authentic aura, as Walter Benjamin lamented, not only generate significant profits, but also divert attention from the festering wounds of the present. Inequality, economic precarity, environmental devastation, and so on. In contemporary consumer culture, reality has been dissolved and replaced by proliferation of images and simulations. Capitalist necromancy leverages our human tendency to value and desire objects of the past, transforming nostalgia into a fetishistic relationship within consumer culture. This phenomena occurs when the object of desire, the past, becomes a substitute for unattainable fulfillment, leading to the fetishization of vintage products and rehashed aesthetics. Retro merchandise and fashion become talismans promising connection to a romanticized past, blurring the lines between reality and fabricated desire. Before we dive further into the video, I'd like to take this time to introduce you to the sponsor of today's video, Bombas. Bombas launched in 2013 after the owners discovered that socks are the #1 most requested item at homeless shelters. From there, Bombas set out to solve that problem by making the things that you wear every day feel good and do good. One purchase equals one donated. Bombas has donated over 1 million items of clothing, focusing on the top 3 most requested clothing items at homeless shelters, which are socks, underwear, and t-shirts. Every Bombas item is thoughtfully designed for comfort. That means socks without annoying toe seams, tees without itchy tags, and underwear with minimal seams for all-day comfort. Bombas has a wide array of styles for every occasion. I chose these black knee-high socks for evoking that 2014 Tumblr girl vibe while keeping me warm and comfortable. I also love these little white socks with the ribbons on them, and they pair perfectly with my favorite Mary Jane flats. And I'm excited to say that Bombas is offering a special deal for viewers of Final Girl Studios so that you can feel good and do good with Bombas. New customers will get 20% off their first purchase at Bombas when they go to bombas.com/finalgirlstudios and use code FINALGIRL at checkout. Thank you again to Bombas for sponsoring this video, and now back to the video. As previously mentioned, the phenomenon of commodified nostalgia is perhaps most vividly illustrated by the current media landscape of remakes, sequels, and prequels. These works, which Quintana aptly refers to as cultural zombies, have become the backbone of current mainstream entertainment. This strategy often reduces these creations to hollow replicas of their original forms, stripped of the innovation and risk-taking that made them significant in the first place. Baudrillard writes in The Transparency of Evil, Essays on Extreme Phenomena, most present-day images, be they video games, paintings, products of the plastic arts, or audiovisual or synthesized images, are literally images in which there is nothing to see. They leave no trace, cast no shadow, and have no consequences. The only feeling one gets from such images is that behind each one there is something that has disappeared. This sensation that Baudrillard describes is present within these sequels, prequels, remakes, and biopics. They are hollow echoes of a previous time, though devoid of weight or substance. I remember when I watched the live-action Lion King film in theaters when it came out, and it was almost note for note the same as the original animated film, though it didn't leave me newly inspired or with a newfound appreciation for the film. All it did was make me feel a desire to watch the original 1994 film instead. There is similar criticism being made as footage has come out from the upcoming 2025 live-action adaptation of How to Train Your Dragon, a remake of the 2010 animated feature of the same name. As the footage made rounds on the internet, one of the primary criticisms was, if you're going to do a note-for-note, shot-by-shot remake of the film, but with different actors and different CGI techniques, is there truly even a point in remaking the film at all? No, probably not. But studios aren't making these films, or rather remaking these films, because they think it's a worthwhile, groundbreaking concept, nor a stimulating artistic pursuit. Capitalist necromancy thrives by preying on the nostalgia you have for a piece of media you loved in your formative years. Rather than risking the investment of original concepts, studios rely on nostalgia capital. Debord writes in The Society of the Spectacle is capital accumulated to the point that it becomes images. The influx of media preying on our nostalgia is a reflection of this sentiment. Remakes, sequels, prequels, and biopics transform nostalgia into commerce to be sold back to the viewer. It turns nostalgia into a physical, tangible thing to be consumed. Or rather, it turns what we are nostalgic for into a simulacrum that we can consume. Lost of its original meaning and devoid of substance, as Baudrillard points out earlier, the images of our childhood replay in front of us in the form of sequels, pandering to the child that we once were. Through this, we are offered to buy back a slice of our childhood. Our memories become merchandise. Debord further states, the spectacle is not a collection of images. Rather, it is a social relationship between people that is mediated by images. What we miss is not the media itself, but rather how we felt when we consumed it originally, and the time in our life that is evoked by the reconsumption or the replication of such media. The childish bliss of watching early morning cartoons with a bowl of cereal. We don't just crave the aesthetics of indie sleaze, but rather the lifestyle that we perceive these people to have when we reflect on these images. Indie sleaze being representative of a projected carefree time, a time before the pervasive presence of social media and cell phones. the perceived freedom and carefree culture that seemingly came alongside this in stark contrast to our ever-increasing surveillance state culture. Many of the people engaging in the replica of indie sleaze culture never experienced a world before the influx of computers and cell phones, to always be at risk of being recorded or becoming a viral moment. Even in the CobraSnake party photos, the people are much more poised, contorting themselves into model-esque poses, which is in stark contrast to the feral partygoers of the 2000s. Fredric Jameson writes, in Postmodernism, the cultural logic of late capitalism, we are condemned to seek history by way of our own pop images and simulacra of that history, which itself remains forever out of reach. And so we come to be nostalgic for not experiences from our own real lives, but experiences of eras and culture and people we did not experience firsthand. I see this in the 20-something-year-olds trying desperately to exactly replicate the bygone party era of the 2000s, retrospectively referred to as indie sleaze. Mark Hunter, aka the CobraSnake, as if summoned from 2000, now weaves his way through partying crowds of NYC and LA, snapping his camera as the partygoers cosplay an era they did not experience. People at these parties behave almost like extras in a film. They're acting like people at a party instead of actually being people at a party. This related to Baudrillard's commentary on the abolition of the symbolic, which, as Fisher explains, led not a direct encounter with the real, but to a kind of hemorrhaging of the real. In reference to reality TV, Fisher further explains, did the presence of the camera affect the behavior of those being filmed? Such questions were undecidable, and their reality would be elusive. At the very moment when it seemed that it was being grasped in the raw, reality transformed into what Baudrillard, in a much misunderstood neologism, called hyperreality. Yet reality TV is continually haunted by questions about fiction and illusion. Are the participants acting, suppressing certain aspects of their personality in order to appear more appealing to us, the audience? This reference of Baudrillard's theories of hyperreality applied to reality TV can now be witnessed off the screen and in the party scenes of LA and New York City. As party photographers such as Mark Hunter roam and everyone has a smartphone in their pocket, this surveillance leads us to behave in a distorted manner. As Mark Hunter has acted as a sort of cultural anthropologist through his 2-decade-long career as a party photographer, I sat down with him on the phone and asked him for his assessment and perspective on this replicated era of indie sleaze that he rose to prominence within, and the shifts that came alongside it. I think what seems to me to be interesting about this indie sleaze revival is there seems to be this desire to replicate it almost exactly, from the music to the style to the movies. I feel when people want to take photos that are indie sleaze adjacent, they almost want it to look exact, they want it to seem as though you can't tell if it was taken from 2007 or yesterday.
Totally.
I wanted to ask, do you, as someone who experienced and helped create this original era, find it strange the way that young people today are trying to exactly replicate this indie sleaze era at all?
I mean, it is truly surreal, and I feel spoiled because it was what I loved, uh, growing up, and it's so nostalgic for me. And the fact that it's back and hopefully still in its early stages, in my opinion, um, is a good sign for the culture because as much as you want to say it's, about the music, the fashion of this, I think it's a really important thing to touch on how it's a welcoming, for me at least, it feels very welcoming, very accepting of all types. You can express yourself how you want to be. You can live your truth. And whereas what happened with the Kardashian effect and all the sort of what they called Mick Bling, where everybody had to be pretty and tan and buff and you know have tons of makeup on all the time or whatever. This indie sleaze is almost the exact opposite, and you can dress the way you want, you can sort of act the way you want, and I think that's truly beautiful.
So do you think that the current indie sleaze revival is an accurate reinterpretation of the era?
I mean, the nothing can be exact, right? And that's like the sort of like we the original time, I love to reference that we didn't have Uber, we didn't have phones that could take pictures, we didn't have uh even GPS that worked. So our resourcefulness was quite different, and the DIY spirit, I would say, was a little bit stronger. You had to interact with people more, and write things down on paper, and like actually go to something to figure out if it was cool. Now with social media, you have a little bit more of a uh, voyeuristic approach, and that you could find out if a party's worth going to based on an Instagram story or not.
Right.
Um, um, and then I think it's important that we're in modern times also trying to have safe spaces and create environments that are going to be welcoming for people, and that is definitely something that's a positive. So the more parties that I see that there's like awareness around like test your drugs or like
Mm-hmm.
party safe, I think that's really key. The wild thing for me is, yeah, the Tumblr references of the photos that I took, um sort of getting played out in modern time, and whether I know it or not, like that's the funny thing, is like sometimes I can really tell, and then other times I'm catching a moment that they might are uh acting for me, but I don't realize, because how am I supposed to know everything that's happening, right? um but yeah, I think that's been always like the funny thing, is that they're really trying to capture the true essence of something, but it's parts of it can definitely end up being performative, uh almost unavoidable.
Yeah, I actually was gonna ask you about that because you of course like rose to prominence like in the 2000s on MySpace, so there still was like social media and people had cell phones, but I feel like it was not as pervasive as it is today. Like cell phones, I mean, and social media, it definitely is like exists within a different context. And many of the people who are like engaging within this replica of indie sleaze culture never really experienced a world before this like influx of social media and cell phones as we know it, and sort of that risk of always being recorded. And on it, like when I contrast a lot of your work from the original indie sleaze era to like today in this indie sleaze revival, I noticed that people kind of seem to be a lot more self-aware in the photos that you take of them, which is ironically seems to be kind of in misalignment by what defined the original indie sleaze era, which was defined by, I feel like, a unique and carefree or unfiltered culture. People were kind of like very messy and unpoised. And by contrast, partygoers today seem to almost like contort themselves into like model-esque or refined versions of what they're perceiving indie sleaze to be. And like I even find myself guilty of this too. Like when you photograph me, I feel like I'm like hyper aware of how I'm being perceived. In the original era of indie sleaze, was that carefreeness genuine, or was that also performance? And do you notice like a change, like this change that I'm seemingly noticing in
Yeah,
the like like I don't know, model-esque poised more filtered version of what is supposed to be an unfiltered culture?
yeah, I agree, and I think that, like I like to say, we're in an infancy stage still. So that sort of like what was forced upon us from the Facetunes and the Kardashian effect of 2015, it's burning off more and more, and so the you know, messiness is coming back. It's just taking a while. And we're also in a weird time where like the term like mogging and whatever is so popular. So there's like a balance, right? Because it's still like Charlie XCX brat, but then it's like let's look really hot and polished, but still brat, So I think there's that to say. And for what it was, it, I would say the the early 2000s, it was more pure, and it was more real, and it was like nobody had stylists, and so you see all these like funny photos of like quote celebrities or people in bands and they're like dressed really bad, but it's just because like that's what it was. And yeah, the ultimate internet, that is now judging every single thing that people do and commenting about things and all that, uh unfortunately is in the back of everybody's subconscious in a way. The thing with phones is like everybody's so like used to highly curating themselves, and that's even like what's so interesting about like my work is like I'm in control of what ends up online, whether you like it or not. And you know, most of the time it's for the best. Like,
Yeah.
the thing is, it's like I truly like I love everybody. I love the creativity. Like the whole reason I started doing this was like the times I would go out and the outfits that I would see were so amazing, but there was nobody taking pictures of them. So I was like, wait,
Yeah.
these people look insane. Why aren't they being documented? It was like early Jeffree Star days. They were
Yeah,
doing the most insane glam. I was like, you belong in the movies. A lot of it, it's truly pure. It's truly out of love and admiration. And the whole thing is that I'm here to like, I'm the biggest supporter of everybody is in my book.
The indie sleaze revival offers us not a reliving of the original indie sleaze era, but rather a simulacrum of what the original indie sleaze era seemed to be. An imitation of the fossilized imprint indie sleaze left on culture through its digital footprint. Though the fossil itself is not an all-encompassing nor entirely accurate portrayal of what has been fossilized, and an imitation of a fossil is not an imitation of the life form that has been fossilized. It lacks the life, the color, and the true essence. What we have been left with instead is a cold, hard remnant of what once was, a soulless imitation of what we can expect things must have been like based on the fossil that has been left behind. River Quintana writes, capitalist necromancy thrives on constructing ideological fantasies around nostalgia, presenting a distorted perception of history that inspires sentimental longing for a time that never truly existed. This construction of nostalgia serves as an ideological fantasy that perpetuates the illusion that capitalism is the solution to our deepest desires and aspirations. By carefully curating imagery and narratives, capitalism creates a hyperreal nostalgia that obscures the contradictions of capitalism and reinforces its supremacy. We are lulled into a comforting loop of the familiar, the past repackaged and resold, effectively anesthetizing our critical faculties. Though, is the nostalgia culture we currently reside in truly unique to the current generation, or are we merely partaking in an inevitable nostalgia cycle where we long for a time that is just out of reach? When researching this essay, I came across a 1993 essay titled The Nostalgia Gap, in which Tom Vanderbilt poses the same question, though within the context of the 90s. Vanderbilt writes, the process of the 1970s nostalgia is a much wilier creature, as are its consumers. Whatever the current parlance 13th gen, 20-something, Generation X, here is the generation that was thrust into the zenith of political and social upheaval in the United States in the 20th century, only to wilt into the merciless, apolitical drought which followed. They shrugged off the liberal and conservative crack-ups and read vague references to the fiscal orgy they were told was bankrupting their future. They continue, we find ourselves in the strange condition of time sped up, a shrinking of the future to look back on the past. The rise of a global media network means that events, styles, trends, fashion, and other sources of future nostalgia are disseminated instantly, and as each new trend is promoted and participated in, a previous one is made obsolete. Culture, like technology and consumer goods, is now run on an assumption of planned obsolescence. These reflections that Vanderbilt poses in this essay are nearly identical to the ones in which I am posing now. One may be inclined to deduce from this article that perhaps we have just always been nostalgic and will always be nostalgic. The increase of the pervasiveness of nostalgia is merely an illusion, though I would argue that this is untrue, that both Vanderbilt and claims made today are accurate in our assessments of nostalgia as an increasingly prevalent and preyed upon sensation experienced within us. When Vanderbilt suggests that time was speeding up in the 90s due to the rise of global media networks, his assessment is not wrong just because we say the same thing today, contrasting the 90s as a slower-paced experience compared to our lives today. If you were in a train that was endlessly increasing its speed as it moved forward, those who first noticed that the train was increasing speed rapidly within the first 5 minutes wouldn't be wrong in their observation just because an hour later, more people noticed this rapid acceleration that is now even faster than it was when it was initially pointed out, and vice versa. Both would be apt in their observation of the acceleration of the train, and neither is more or less accurate due to the other's observation. In the same sense as Vanderbilt points out, as the world seemingly gets increasingly smaller with the influx of social media continuously feeding us trend cycles at an increased rapid pace, and our elusive need for nostalgia is inflated with this acceleration. Baudrillard reflects on the impact of images as the meticulous reduplication of the real, preferably through another reproductive medium such as photography. In response to Baudrillard's sentiment, Vanderbilt writes, i.e., more real than the real itself. The search for the real in Baudrillard's phrase is no more than a fetishism of the lost object. We see this in the desperate attempts to replicate the indie sleaze era as seen in the photographs of the time. Youth search for the real that can be seen captured in the CobraSnake photographs, though in doing so merely fetishize the lost object as Baudrillard expresses. Baudrillard further writes, when the real is no longer what it was, nostalgia assumes its full meaning. And so, as we come to embody the fossilized replica of what once was, we grow to be consumed by nostalgia in the place of experiencing reality. Culture has become an Ouroboros of sorts, continuously consuming itself. As we approach the season of Trump's second term as president, it is apt to note the way in which Trump has used nostalgia to mobilize voters. A man whose campaign ran on the nostalgia-fueled slogan, "Make America Great Again," a slogan that evokes the imagery of a golden age of America, an America that was prosperous, stable, and with social cohesion. However, this is an America that never truly existed. This slogan is left intentionally vague, allowing his supporters to project their own versions of an idealized past into the campaign, when in reality, this is a romanticization of nostalgia for an America that was never real. Vanderbilt similarly reflects on this in regards to the Reagan presidency. Nostalgia is a form of propaganda, an exercise in laughter and forgetting, in which the right visual iconography and perceived authenticity can create a longing for an existence which is no longer possible and was in fact never possible. The popularity of the Reagan presidency amongst younger voters was driven by this manufactured nostalgia, as his White House character was based on a mixture of the unfettered Cold War hardliner, the tough lawman of Hollywood westerns, and a traditional religious family man. The fact that he was twice divorced and rarely attended church seemed a peripheral issue. Gary Wills argued the power of Reagan's appeal lay in the great joint confession that we cannot live with our real past, that we not only prefer, but need a substitute. Because of that, we will a belief in all his stories. We see this same phenomenon occurring in the Trump campaign, and the rise of voters charmed by this notion of returning to simpler times and restoring America to its destined greatness. Through Trump's projected traditional value system, the strategy mirrors Reagan's own appeal during this presidency, as Vanderbilt suggests. Like Reagan, Trump offers not a vision for a complex and uncertain future, but a comforting mythology, a narrative that rejects the messiness of historical truths in favor of simplified archetypes. Mark Fisher similarly reflects on this political aspect of nostalgia in Ghosts of My Life. He writes, "The slow cancellation of the future has been accompanied by a deflation of expectations. There can be few who believe that in the coming year a record as great as, say, The Stooges' Funhouse or Sly Stone's There's a Riot Going On will be released. Still, less do we expect the kind of ruptures brought by the Beatles or disco. The feeling of belatedness, of living after the gold rush, is as omnipresent as it is disavowed. Compare the fallow terrain of the current moment with the fecundity of previous periods, and you will quickly be accused of nostalgia. But the reliance of current artists on styles that were established long ago suggests that the current moment is in the grip of a formal nostalgia. It is not that nothing happened in the period when the slow cancellation of the future set in. On the contrary, those 30 years has been a time of massive traumatic change. In the UK, the election of Margaret Thatcher had brought to an end the uneasy comprises of the so-called post-war social consensus. Thatcher's neoliberal program in politics was reinforced by a transnational restructuring of capitalist economy, the shift into so-called post-Fordism. With globalization, ubiquitous computerization, and the casualization of labor resulted in a complete transformation in the way that work and leisure were organized. In the last 10 to 15 years, meanwhile, the internet and mobile telecommunications technology have altered the texture of everyday experience beyond all recognition. Yet, perhaps because of all of this, there is an increasing sense that culture has lost the ability to grasp and articulate the present. Or it could be that, in one very important sense, there is no present to grasp and articulate anymore. This perpetual recycling of content can be seen as a refusal to confront the complexities of the present or envision a more challenging or innovative future. Nostalgia, in this form, operates as a coping mechanism in an era marked by rapid technological change, social political instability, and environmental crises. By looking backward, the media offers a temporary reprieve, a promise of stability in a world that feels increasingly unstable. However, this retreat into the past risks becoming escapist, locking us in a loop where the past is continually rehashed rather than used in a foundation for progress or critique. River Quintana concluded in their essay, "Capitalist necromancy feeds on our perpetual pursuit of unfulfilled desires. By commodifying nostalgia, it offers the illusion of satisfaction through the consumption of simulated experiences and hyper-real replicas of the past. The result is a meticulously constructed theme park of history, sanitized and curated, erasing the complexities and struggles of the actual past. While these simulations provide a semblance of fulfillment, they ultimately perpetuate the insatiable nature of desire within the capitalist system. In this way, capitalism reinforces the cycle of consumption and sustains its own ideological stranglehold." The complexities, struggles, and nuances of the past are not just erased, but replaced with a simulacrum designed to evoke emotional satisfaction while avoiding discomfort or critical reflection. In a culture that seems to increasingly sell our memories back to us as merchandise in this era of commodified nostalgia, this theme park isn't just a site of amusement. It's a carefully curated spectacle that prioritizes what is marketable and palatable over what is authentic or true. How can we expect to move forward when we are being consumed by the past?